All right, we're welcoming Shelby onto our show today. Shelby is a sophomore at Benedictine College studying accounting, and we are going to have so much fun during this conversation today because Shelby is such a light. We're currently studying abroad right now, and she is one of my favorite people on this trip
Aw.
because she's always such a good friend and someone that you can always talk to and has very interesting thoughts that I love it when she shares them all the time. So, welcome, Shelby. Thanks for
Thank
coming on the
you.
podcast today.
Thank you, Eve. I'm happy to be here.
Yes, so to start us off, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself,
Okay.
what brought you to the faith, why you're pursuing your faith now?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I am what's called a cradle Catholic, which means somebody who is born into the faith. So, it's the faith of my parents and my grandparents and a lot of my extended family. And so, I was baptized when I was born and got put into religious education classes throughout my whole life and youth group and the whole thing. And it wasn't really until I would say my confirmation year is when things shifted. And in my home diocese, that's eighth grade for us. And so it was really that year that I really started going deeper into my faith, I guess, and seeing the richness of it. And I always, as a child, had a unique relationship with Christ in a way that it felt personal. And I always knew and felt that He was there with me. But my confirmation year, there's just so many graces that come from the sacrament of confirmation that it was really just like tenfold what He was doing in my life. And after that summer after my eighth grade year, before I went into high school, I went on a mission trip with my youth group. And oh man, where did we go? I believe that was when we went to Oklahoma City, and I got to work with some kids from the inner city who didn't necessarily have the most loving home life, and a lot of the kids suffered from abuse and neglect. And so being able to go and take care of them, and we went back day after day for a week, and so we got to know the kids really well. And there was one in particular, he at first was really standoffish with me and was kind of mean, and honestly I was scared of him. But by the end of the week he was braiding my hair and telling me stories, and we had nicknames for each other. And that also like changed my whole perspective of my life and what I wanted to be doing and how I wanted to be serving. And it increased my love for my neighbors a lot. And I realized how much love I had to give and how much more I needed to give than I was already giving. So I really dug in during high school, went to youth group, and started seeking out more answers for myself about my questions in the faith. And since then, it's just been, I want to say steady growth, but there's been a lot of troughs too. So it's kind of like an up and down and an up and down, just like the business cycle for, for you business folks out there. So yeah, that's kind of where I'm at now.
That's lovely, and I really like that you pointed out that it's not always a steady growth. Because in your faith, there's just so many different things that happen in your life, and sometimes it doesn't always feel like you can pour out into something, but there's also that reminder that being someone of faith isn't pouring out into another thing, it's what pours into you so that you can do everything else that you want to do. Can you tell us about how you kind of go through those moments where it might not be steady growth? Like what helps you through that?
Oh yeah. Man, that's a good question. Kind of just time a little bit. You do have to give it some time when you find yourself in what a lot of people call spiritual dryness. It's something that it's still a gift from God to be in that time of your life, and Saint Faustina and Saint Teresa of Calcutta are great examples of that. So reading anything written by them, like literally anything at all, sheds a lot of light into that human experience. But for me, what's really important during those times is being extra gentle and gracious to myself and recognizing, like there's something going on here in my heart and I need to recognize that and I need to kind of slow down and recenter. And a part of that for me is taking smaller times to pray and finding a way to pray that I can commit to. So for me, most recently, I went through a period of probably 5 months of spiritual dryness. And for me, what eventually helped me get out of it was saying a decade of the rosary every day. So that was something that when I went to confession that I got as my penance was to say a decade of the rosary. And I was like, you know what, I'm going to start doing this every day. And so I did that every day consistently for almost 3 weeks. And then I started slowly adding things in and building my prayer life back up to fit where I was at in life. And one of my friends reached out and asked me if I wanted to do a Marian consecration with her. And so I said yes to that, which was kind of funny because I've tried to do the 33 days to morning glory so many times in the past and never did all 33 days, but I just on September 17th finished it, and so I'm fully consecrated. Yay! I'm really happy and excited about that. The other piece of advice I would have is think of a saint, and like I mentioned, Saint Faustina and Saint Teresa are great ones to kind of ask to help you through that time, just to give you a little kickstart.
Yeah, I really like that, and I've been thinking a lot about spiritual dryness too, because I remember in high school, for me, part of my story is I grew up being Catholic, but then I really started taking it seriously my junior year of high school, and I felt like that moment for the next year, I felt really on fire for God, and then I started losing that a little bit, and for me, I was like, what's going on? Does that mean I'm doing something wrong? And then I took that as a spiritual dryness point, which I don't know entirely if it was, because it was really my first experience with anything like that. But more recently, I've been thinking a lot on the concept of spiritual dryness, and one of the things that a priest told me when I was kind of explaining how that feeling is going away was that our faith isn't about the feeling, and it's about an actual relationship with God. Sometimes he pulls away that feeling so we can have true faith. And in that, recently, obviously, as I mentioned before, we're in Italy right now. And as you know, I'm gluten intolerant, so I promise this is going somewhere, and I'm not just bringing it up.
It's in case you didn't know, I can't have gluten.
It's not a personality trait, only when we go out to eat. But with that, whenever we go to Mass, and we go to Mass pretty frequently here because we are such a really strong Catholic group, but when we go to Mass, I'm not always able to receive the Eucharist if they don't have a host available to me, which is obviously something that really bothers my heart when I'm sitting there preparing myself, and then you're so excited to receive the Eucharist and then you can't. And for me, that's really taught me to appreciate the Eucharist more, because every time I get to receive it, I also remember all the times that I haven't been able to receive it, not because of something I've done, but something completely out of my control. And so with that, I've kind of applied it to spiritual dryness, where sometimes God doesn't allow you to experience those strong emotions, because that those moments of true, genuine love between God are so much greater, because you're in a space where you know what it's been like to not have that, and now you know what it's like to be able to fully appreciate that.
Yes, and it's in those moments when God strips away all of the emotions that you get to prove to him that you love him for who he is and not what he can give you. And that was something I read that just totally blew me away, because I was like, how selfish am I to be sitting here oh no, I haven't shed a tear about Jesus in so long, when it sounds so silly saying it out loud. But yeah, I had a lot of moments during that 5-month period of time going to Mass and sitting there during the consecration, and especially during the elevation of the host, where I was looking at Jesus, and I said the prayer to myself, I know my faith are not my feelings. And that was definitely one of the hardest lessons for me to learn, because I just feel things so strongly. My emotions, a lot of people would think of it as more of a negative, and I used to, but now I see my feelings as a strength. But it was that period of time where Jesus was kind of testing me, of seeing how faithful and loyal I would be to him, even if I couldn't feel. So there's a quote from the Diary of St. Faustina that I remember reading, and it like hit me like a truck. It was, oh my gosh, it was crazy. It said, I'm going to butcher it, but it basically said, no matter how good a confessor is or how good a quote you read, if Jesus wants a soul in darkness, the soul is going to stay in darkness.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, man.
Dang.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense.
Yeah, it really is. And I need to finish reading St. Faustina's diary, but that's one of the books that I return to when I'm in a spiritual dry spot and when I'm in kind of that lull of my faith life, and it kind of gives me comfort because she went through so much suffering that it just makes me think, I'm like, I've got nothing. I'm like,
I can hear the water from upstairs.
I know the old pipes in this building are so funny.
Sorry, I was really trying not to laugh. Because what you were saying was so good.
Hear the toilet flush.
As for anyone wondering, we're living in a very old monastery while we're here, which is the coolest thing.
It's so cool,
but we did pick a room where you can hear when people flush their toilet.
Yeah, there's pipes on the wall, like right next to us. Have you ever noticed those?
I have not.
Yep. Yep.
Anywho.
Anyways.
Little moment of authenticity there.
It's quite something. It's quite something.
Yes. All right.
Yes.
So bringing it back to our conversation.
St. Faustina.
Yes.
Divine Mercy. Give it a read, give it a listen. You won't regret it.
Wonderful.
Yep.
All right. So I know you've mentioned that you went to religious education, which means that you didn't go to a Catholic or a private school growing up.
Yes.
How did you go about being Catholic in an environment that really didn't facilitate a desire for God? Or maybe even you probably encountered some people who didn't believe the same things that you did, and it was hard to find like-minded people. How did you go about finding a good group of friends and still pursuing the faith, even amidst an environment that didn't quite help your faith all the time?
Yeah. Honestly, I wish that I could say that I did it better than I did, but I didn't. And there was a lot of compartmentalizing my life that went on. So I was school Shelby, and I was church Shelby, and I was dance Shelby. I had all of these different kind of hats I would put on. That's the phrase. But I had all of these different hats that I would put on to fit where I was. And granted, my friends at school were great. They were all really solid girls. I didn't have many guy friends during high school just because I don't know, I just didn't. I did in elementary school, and guy friends are great, but that just wasn't really my focus in high school. And my friends, I had some friends that went to my school that also went to my church. So we had that crossover. We would go to youth group together and then go to school together. So that was actually really nice. There were quite a few of those types of gals. But it was really difficult because I didn't really know how to bring up the faith or talk about it. So I didn't really at school, unless there was something very obvious that I could talk on. I would never bring it up, but I also wouldn't shy away from it, I guess. So, for example, Ash Wednesday. There were a lot of years where I couldn't go to Mass after school because I had dance practice. So I would go to get my ashes and go to the Mass either before school or during lunch. My mom would call me out of school so I could go with her. And so, of course, I would end up wearing the ashes to school. And there was one year, it was in middle school. I think it was probably it was 7th grade. and people started calling me the girl with ashes on her head, which I found so funny. Like, I'm pretty thick-skinned when it comes to things like that, so it didn't really bother me very much. But it did give me the chance. People would constantly be like, oh my gosh, what's on your head? Like, you have something on your head. And then I would be able to explain to them, like, no, that's kind of a bit of a memento mori thing, which I didn't know what memento mori was when I was that age. But I was like, it's symbolic of recognizing our mortality and, like, remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return, and explaining the whole concept of Lent and the whole concept of Easter. And it really opened the door for that. But that was kind of the only evangelizing, I guess, that I did. And I did try to bring people to church with me from school. So we had this thing that we started, because my school was right across the street from my church. Mm-hmm. So it was a really unique experience, because at lunch sometimes a group of us would go over to the church, and sometimes there would be adoration and stuff. And there were, I guess these were my guy friends in high school. They were upperclassmen who I was in youth group with, and they kind of took me under their wing because they went to the same high school, and they invited me to, technically I wasn't allowed to go off campus, so they invited me to like sneak off campus to go to adoration with them during lunch, and I never did, but I did in my later years. So that was always kind of fun, and I brought some friends who weren't Catholic with me, and kind of explain to them, like, you know, what it is and why we do it. So I guess there were moments that I was able to share the faith, but as a whole, that wasn't really my focus. I was kind of inwardly focused during high school with my faith and growing it interiorly, and not as much sharing it.
I think that's very fair, and I don't know if you give yourself enough credit, because even just reflecting on your own faith is a really important part of being in the faith. If you don't have that strong foundation, trying to go out and evangelize, while there may be fruits to it, if that's like something that God is calling you to, sometimes there aren't going to be fruits to it because you're not well versed enough interiorly to be able to listen to people challenge your faith and then come back with a loving response that speaks truth into their own hearts. And sometimes the best thing that we can do, it maybe isn't even specifically outright saying, like, I believe in God and this is why I'm doing it, but setting an example just through your actions, like being nice to people or treating them with kindness. And being a Catholic or being a Christian, if you live your life the right way, there's just a presence about you that's indescribable. And there's no way that people cannot see that. There's like, I don't know if you know, like there's just like a light, like if you know a nun or a sister who's really, really like has a beautiful faith, or just even a friend that is very strong in their faith, you can tell just by the way that they live their life, not even by the words that they say. And sometimes just the best thing that you can do is be obedient to God. Like, make your bed in the morning. And go on living your life in a way that honors God. And sometimes that's the best thing that you can do while you're still working on it versus forcing it in a way. And that doesn't mean to not evangelize. Like, we should be evangelizing. But a really unique form of evangelization is just through your actions.
Thank you. That's a good point. Yeah, that is. They'll know we are Christians by our love.
Exactly. Yes. And I know that you're like a very busy person, like throughout high school and into college. How do you balance being like Catholic and making time for your faith, but also so busy?
Yeah, honestly, it kind of got to the point where I couldn't do both. Like, it got to a point for me in high school where I was just bleeding myself dry on every front, and I had to take a step back and think to myself, like, you know, I need to cut something out. Like, something has to go. What is it going to be? Obviously, for me, it wasn't even an option that crossed my mind to, like, skip out on youth group or skip out on church. Like, that was never, and the way my parents raised me, too, like, that just wasn't an option. Church is on Sundays, youth group is on Sundays. That's, like, non-negotiable. You're not doing something that makes you miss it. So then it left like school, dance, and work, which school I have to go Dance was my passion, and work, I had to be saving up money for college. And so it was really, really hard to kind of have to pick. So I ended up dropping some more of my extracurriculars at school. So like I left the robotics team, which was my favorite part of high school for like freshman and sophomore year, but I just had to choose something. And I was like, well, I guess that has to go. And then after that, it got a bit easier to balance faith life and everything else. And as I got to college, I learned better how to merge the two. So it became, there was no more my faith life and my real life. Like, my real life is my faith life. They are the same. That, like, they need to be together as one. And I had that moment the summer before freshman year of college when I went on another mission trip. And it was the opening night, and someone was giving a talk. And they're like, look around you, like, this is your real life. There's no going back to real life. Like, I feel like a lot of people get that feeling at a retreat of like, oh, this is a nice break. This is a nice escape from real life. And then as soon as it ends, we go back to our real life and we lose the flame. We lose the fire that we gained while we were away on retreat. And so they were kind of saying, you need to bring this back. Like, this is your real life. This isn't some dream, you know. And so I started more intentionally throughout my day. If there is something that made me smile, I would say, oh, thank you, Jesus. And that in itself is a prayer. Just remembering him is enough of a prayer. And I used to, after like a big test or something, I would get a fancy coffee and reward myself. I'd be like, oh, I did such a good job on this. But then I started thinking of it as, oh, I'm going to go get a coffee and I'm going to celebrate with Jesus for the grace he gave me, like taking that test. So instead of making it like me-centered, I did that, more of a we did that, like you helped me do that. So those are little ways, even when we're busy, that we can just kind of remember him and bring him into the little things in our daily life.
I really like that. I like that you would go get like the coffee and then you celebrated with Jesus. I feel like that's almost a coffee date with Jesus in the sweetest way.
Yeah.
Like you just get to celebrate with him.
It was so nice.
That is so sweet.
Like aced the test and I was like, yeah, let's go celebrate.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, that's very beautiful.
It's fun. Thank you. Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who's just starting out in their faith or wants to explore it more deeply?
Excuse me. No, I can't look at you or I'm gonna laugh again. Don't get discouraged.
Try to edit this out, but I'm gonna be completely honest. I have no idea how to edit.
It'll be even better. It's gonna be like a 40-minute video of us just laughing. There's the authenticity again.
I know. Glad we prayed for it beforehand.
Me too.
It's like praying for humility.
Yep. Literally. Oh man. But yeah. Anyways. Don't get discouraged when you're starting out, and don't compare yourself. Think of it as wearing blinders like they put on horses, and the blinders are keeping everybody else out, and you just need to look to Jesus. Because once you start looking up and looking around you, you're going to see other people on their individual walk, and you're going to get discouraged and think, oh, well, why are they holier than me? Why do they enjoy this more? Like, for example, one of our dear friends on this trip, she absolutely loves going to daily mass. Like, it is her jam. She always talks about how excited she is to go spend time with Jesus and how excited she is to go sit in the mass and just be there. And for me, I love mass too. Like, I do enjoy going to daily mass, but it just like isn't the same for me as it is for her. And so I had this moment where I started comparing myself. I was like, oh, well, do I even deserve to go to heaven if I don't like jump at the chance to go to daily mass like every time I can? Because, you know, heaven's an eternal mass, so if you don't want to be in mass, then why would you want to go to heaven? Which is, anyways, this whole thing.
The spiral.
Yeah, so like,
where your brain goes.
yeah, so I started having this spiral moment of like, well, why don't I feel like that strongly about going to daily mass? Why am I not like super giddy and excited like she is? But like, Jesus was kind of like, dude, chill out. Like, Shelby, it's okay you still go and you still devote yourself to me. You don't need to feel super excited and happy to go all the time. Like, you going is enough. And just remembering that we all have our different strengths and our different gifts and not comparing yours to somebody else's. Just like there's so many different types of prayer. There's Lectio Divina, there's Visio Divina, there's praying with music, there's praying with other people, spontaneous. Like there's so many different types of prayer. And it is that way to cater to people's different like spiritualities, you know, because like there's the Ignatian spirituality and then that's the only one I know off the top of my head. But like there's all these different ones because God speaks to people's souls differently because he made people's souls differently.
That concludes our very first episode of the Everyday Saint podcast. Thank you so much for listening today. As you can tell, that video did end a little prematurely because I was taking a few too many photos while studying abroad in Italy in my storage room as we were filming the video. But that's alright because I have a whole line of interviews lined up for you coming every single Friday, and I'll be back at Benedictine College this weekend, probably driving there as you're listening to this podcast today. And I'm so excited because I have so many of these interviews lined up of your everyday saints who are going to inspire you and fill your hearts with so much wisdom and guidance. So please like and subscribe however you're listening to this podcast today, and be sure to follow us on Instagram and TikTok at the Everyday Saint Podcast. God bless you.